Salutations, friends, and welcome to League Unlock. We got a special episode for you today because we're looking back at some of the greatest playoff series in the history of the LCS. What's better than playoff time in the League Championship Series since it's been around, even though there's only been a handful of teams to actually capture the LCS crown. The journeys to get there and those finals matchups almost always have a degree of anticipation, close enough, excitement, and just overall, you want to see these games, which is why we're counting down the top 5 LCS playoff series of all time. And what better way to start than with number 5? And we're talking about Team Liquid and CLG in the 2016 spring semifinals. This is before 2018 when Liquid had an entirely revamped roster. This was kind of the peak for Team Liquid when it came to the LCS. Yeah, in 2015 they finished first, but they fizzled out in the playoffs. In 2016 spring, they faced up against CLG, and they were oh so close to making it to those grand finals. Let's go through the series, starting with Game 1, where these guys finished near the top of the standings in the regular season. This was obviously the split where TSM slumped a little bit, and in Game 1, it was Piglet on the Caitlyn. And by the way, Piglet and Phoenix had fantastic seasons yet again for Liquid. Pretty much a year stretch where they had that, but he locked up the quadra kill on Caitlyn to secure a pretty convincing Game 1 win for Liquid. It was back and forth for a while, but eventually the Liquid boys ran away with it. We move into Game 2, where you saw the Lucian for Stixxay and for the Echo for Darshan, who, by the way, was a staple pick in the meta during this time, and Darshan got his hands on it quite a bit. You see here 24-8. Reversal of roles here. CLG dominates Liquid in that game, and then we're all tied at 1, and Game 3 was just a lot more dominance from Liquid, and Stixxay in particular, the rookie AD carry for CLG at the time. He puts up an 11-1-4 scoreline for Caitlyn, who obviously was a super meta pick here, as Piglet and Stixxay were both heavily contesting for that pick. And then in Game 4, the main thing here you got to look at is the Tristana for Stixxay, which was pretty much permabanned throughout the entire series. He finally gets his hand on it in Game 4, but Liquid says, doesn't matter. We'll completely shut you down in the early game. Matt's Bard was absolutely incredible. Phoenix picks up a quadra kill there on the Karma mid, but look at these ultimates from Matt on that Bard. They shut down Tristana. Stixxay's Tristana to another convincing win, this time in Liquid's favor, and that would tie the series all up at 2. And pretty much all these series are going to go to 5 games because that's how the series are amazing. But back and forth, kind of teams exchanging blows. Yeah, some of them were blowouts, but there were some explosive team fights and a lot of dominance when it comes to, just CC lock and wombo combos. And then we move into the 5th and decisive game. And obviously, this is where you have the most memorable moment from this series. It's Piglet, who thinks he's nice and safe in a lane, but then CLG comes in with not one, but the old-fashioned double teleport.
He can do some big damage. Eyes on him in these fights for sure.
And Piglet is definitely in hypercarry mode right now, but Darshan wants to kill him.
That's a little ambitious.
Oh, the double TP!
It's two of them, the double TP! He only thought it was one. He had to have only thought it was one TP, and he could exit that with a Caliber net.
It is nearly impossible to tell when two people are coming in on the same ward. You get to see the
wow.
It lights up for like a fraction of a second, and I do not know a person on this earth who can read that live.
So sad. Now, they were a little bit behind in that 5th game, but that was the game ender. Piglet thinking, oh my god, one Poppy's going to TP? No problem, I'll completely destroy them. It ends up being Huhi on the rise as well, and then absolutely no chance for Piglet. In that 1v2, he goes down. CLG closes the game out from there, and Liquid so close to getting to the finals in 2016, but it doesn't come true. Let's roll on with the countdown, move on to number 4, where we've got a TSM versus C9. We're going to 2017 spring. Obviously, these guys have played a whole lot of finals together, and if you remember correctly, this split is the one that Doublelift decided to take off for streaming, so Wild Turtle in at starting AD carry for them. And let's jump into Game 1, where you had pretty much a stomp in the favor of TSM. And as you remember, this is also the split where you saw Ray and Impact kind of switching a lot in that top lane. So it was Ray who got the start in game 1, but TSM was just all over C9 in this one to take a pretty commanding lead, even though C9 is popping off here. Oh, this game is actually C9 stomping. I don't know what I'm talking about. C9 stomps game 1 to take a 1-0 lead with Ray getting that win. And then we move in to game number 2. And this is actually, again, I just completely got the numbers wrong here. This is the 2014 summer playoffs, where this is before when C9 was dominating TSM, and they came into this one and TSM finally won a game back. C9 had just 3-0'd them in back-to-back splits, and finally TSM got a win against them, and you had a very back-and-forth series in this matchup, which you weren't exactly expecting. You had an AP Alistair for Dyrus in that last game, and High went 1-9-7, but here in game 3, it's a much more slow-paced game. High goes 6-0 on the Zed, gets a little bit of redemption from that not so great performance in game 3, and this is when the concern started coming for High in that mid lane for C9, but he bounces back in game 3, and C9 takes a 2-1 series win. It looks like it's just going to be the same as usual for Cloud9, and then in game 4, TSM actually comes back. The Xerath for Bjergsen is absolutely disgusting, puts out some ludicrous damage. The Tristana was the most contested pick, obviously, in this series, as Turtle cleans up with a quadra kill on the Trist here. She's been broken at all kinds of different times throughout the meta, but now we're tied at 2. Another underwhelming game for High. He goes 0-6-3 in that matchup on the Oriana, and then it takes us to game 5, which again, something TSM could not even get close to before 2014 summer. They were 0-6 against C9 in the playoffs, and then heading into that 5th game, it was going to be the Tristana pick yet again, and it's the patented Wild Turtle triple crit with only 45% crit chance. Way to go, Riot, with the RNG.
TSM has avoided quite a bit. Teleport from balls coming in actually from the base. Home guards are not able to utilize this big engage. Dyrus just out of range on that. Home guard wears off. Not much damage from the shockwave, but the control TSM needs to reassess the fight. Balls gets hit up. The Glacial Fish are on the backside. They've bottlenecked into this fight and are going for broke. High goes in, tries to get his ultimate down. Last breath has already been used. Coming up with focus. Wow, Turtle! Turtle on the triple. Turtle on the quadra. Meteos on the outside. A second quadra in the playoffs for Turtle.
And even with the kills, even because the fight was so close to Cloud9's base, this could be the end of the series.
This could be it. Team Solo Mid looking to dethrone Cloud9 as the North American champions. They lay down the ward, so they have all the vision necessary. A 10-10, 40-minute game, 60,000 gold apiece on each side, and Meteos trying his damnedest to stop it.
And after all the tension, TSM finds the fight, and Wild Turtle goes wild right there on that last fight, outplaying Cloud9 and carrying TSM to the championship.
The ace, that's the game. TSM goes to full 5 and takes down Cloud9 to be the 2014 North American champions.
3 crits in a row sends TSM over C9 for the first time in a best-of series, and that would be the last time that TSM got out of groups at Worlds as that top seed. Coming up after the break, the countdown continues, and CLG proves that they don't need no double lift in their roster to win an LCS title. Welcome back to League on Lock. My name's Eric, and today we are counting down the 5 best playoff series in the history of the LCS, and we're moving on to number 3. And this one is the 2017 Spring Final between C9 and TSM. Not number 4, they're up to number 3, and this is the split where Wild Turtle was subbed in for double lift, and this is an era where TSM had historically dominated C9 in these matchups, and this series, it looked like it was no different starting off in Game 1. And by the way, this series here at the ACC in Toronto, Canada, so you know it's really it should be the best playoff series of all time, because it's one of few that was in Canada, but in Game 1, it was a pretty one-sided stomp in the favor of TSM, and again, as I said earlier incorrectly, Ray and Impact kind of split a lot of time for C9 in this set. Ray got the start in game 1 and they got handily destroyed, so Impact subbed in for game 2 and it didn't look any better for C9 in this one. Jensen goes for the solo kill on Bjergsen and comes up so short. That's a feels bad, man. TSM again snowballed this one pretty quickly. They were winning across every lane to jump out to a quick 2-0 lead, and it just looked like more of the same. TSM completely dumpstering C9, really taking a swing of momentum in favor of them with their competitive rivalry. But then game 3, it was again, TSM had a pretty sizable lead, but C9 did a good job defending a couple of times in their base. They defended against an Elder Dragon, and eventually it went to a Baron fight where they actually cleaned up a few kills for TSM to keep their playoff hopes and dreams alive. They clean up this fight, would eventually go out to close game 3, stay alive in the series, move it to 2-1, and avoid the sweep. They usually didn't get swept in this time. They'd usually go 3-1 down to TSM, and that's what they were hoping. But heading into game 4, this time Jensen gets the Syndra. Bjergsen had been popping off on it earlier in the series, but Jensen gets it in game 4, and then he completely demolishes with it. This is peak broken Syndra, and just like that, cue the silver scrapes. We somehow actually got back to a game 5, which it did not look like was going to be the case when it was 2-0 in favor of TSM, and they were dominant wins too. You saw 22 kills to 4, kind of like that. But then we got to game 5, and it was a nail-biter back and forth, and this one is infamous for Jensen, and not for something positive. It's his echo, where he forgets to press buttons.
Sneaky getting the pressure down mid lane. Contracts are available. He can seal it. This is 50-50.
TP in from Monster. Here we go.
Here's Ray in as well. On this win, Scarron's going to try and keep them out. Redemption down. Ray dives back. Give it hard. They kill Jensen. Jensen. Bjergsen gets the kill. And now Ray.
Sneaky on the side.
Still trying to fight around, but he can't get into the fight. Smoothie. Far too low. Goes down. And they're going to take Elder Dragon as well. Disaster for Cloud9.
Jensen didn't get his Zonias off. Didn't get his ultimate off. He goes down in the critical fight.
Now, people love to flame Jensen for that play, but he's at almost 70% life, and he doesn't even get Syndra ulted, and he gets popped and destroyed completely. So let's ease up off our boy Jensen from that one. There's no way you're expecting that damage. And Syndra is a completely broken champion. C9 loses that one. But boy, was it close. Let's move on to number 2, which is back to the 2016 spring split. We already talked about Liquid CLG. Well, the next series CLG played was, of course, against TSM, and they were the defending champs, CLG that is, but this was right after Doublelift left the team to go to TSM, so you know there was some blood brewing, some blood boiling in this already heated up rivalry. And game 1, by the way, TSM came 9-9 into this playoff series. This is when they upset Immortals. They dumpstered C9 in the quarterfinals, and then heading in to game 1, it was a real barn burner, back and forth. TSM cleans up a fight. They get 4 kills, but the Winions in TSM's base, there's nobody back there to stop it. Yellow Star is hopeless as a Braum. Haunter can't do anything as the Gragas. CLG take game 1, and remember 2015, they 3-0'd TSM with that roster. Game 2, you had a sick pulverize by Yellow Star. Again, this is the Yellow Star iteration of TSM. He lands a sick pulverize, and TSM clean up that fight there. Pretty dominant in the favor of TSM. Haunter on tank duty on the Poppy actually locks up a triple kill to close it out. In game 3, this series was just all about absolutely insane team fights. Some crazy Bard ultimates and stuns from Aframu, as that's pretty much his pocket pick in any meta. This fight kind of secured the momentum in favor of CLG in this game, and they would eventually close it out. But again, I just gotta say, the team fights in this entire series were absolutely insane. There's pretty high kill counts, and they were just extended fights, kind of like Griffin in 2018, with just the team fights never seem to end. Game 4, CLG up 2-1. You had Bjergsen on the Lulu and Doublelift on Caitlyn. Oh, playing against Lulu, isn't that a fun meta? They clean up this fight because Wild Growth is a incredibly ridiculous skill along with Lulu's shield. No one can even touch Doublelift, and he just completely destroys everyone on CLG. Eventually take down his replacement in Stixxay for the ace to force a 5th and decisive final game, which is what everyone would want out of the CLG and TSM rivalry. And after a horrible regular season going 9-9, TSM were 1 game away from capturing the LCS title. Not just 1 game, 1 team fight, but it was Doublelift's replacement Stixxay who completely pops off in the final fight to get CLG back-to-back titles.
And here comes Hanser, looks for the play, gets headbutted and gets pulverized around. They knock in Stixxay, but he's going to be all right with this one. Now into the front line, Hanser taking so much damage. Going to get saved by Cunit for now. Now they've got to wait for the rapid fire to be back up. In goes them again. Svenskar forced to flash away. Darshan has GA, gets popped around. Knocked back now by Buster Shot as well. Bjergsen is low. Stixxay gets hit up, but QS is out. He's still going to tag. He's trying to reset. He's going in for the resets. Yellow Star got another one. He's going over 3. Stixxay with the Tristana!
The Rageblade Tristana got through the pick and ban in the Liquid series, and as you remember, it didn't go that well. It was pretty underwhelming, but in this matchup it gets through and it completely carries CLG in the team fights to a victory back-to-back. They prove they don't need Doublelift in the lineup, and if you remember that post-game, Aphromoo shouts out the likes of Nien, Dexter, Link, and Seraph, and chooses to leave out Doublelift in that thank you speech, kind of showing a shot towards him. But that series was absolutely incredible and just another installment in the CLG-TSM rivalry. Coming up after the break, we hit number 1 on our list, and it's 2 of the best European rosters of all time meeting in the finals. We're back here on League Unlocked, counting down the best playoff series in the history of the LCS, and we have reached number 1 on our list. This is actually number 2, because I have 2 number 1s. But number 1 on our list. But before we get there, let's do some honorable mentions to a couple of playoff series that didn't quite crack the top 5, starting with TSM versus LMQ way back in 2014 spring, which the series after this was on our list, but this is when Dyrus was losing his mind, getting a solo kill on Ackerman. It was a hard-fought battle. This is when LMQ completely destroyed the North American LCS, when it's the 3rd seed to Worlds, but TSM comes through in Game 5. Zhao Weizhao got a pentakill to keep them alive. And then we're talking about UOL versus SK in the semifinals of 2015 spring. This is Forgiven's version of SK, and as you recall, they had a big lead against Unicorns. Looked like they were ready to go to the finals as the top seed, and then Power of Evil steals the Baron with the Shockwave, and UOL would eventually stay alive long enough in that game to close it out. SK chokes it away. They definitely should have won that playoff series, and we would have got to see Forgiven versus, it wasn't Reckless at that time, it was Steelback on Fnatic, but you wanted to see Forgiven in the finals, but SK comes up just short. So those are a couple honorable mentions that just came up short on our list. But let's move to number 1, and it's actually the only EU game that's on our list because the finals have been stomps quite often in the EU LCS. We're talking about Fnatic versus Origen, or Fnatic Gold versus Fnatic Black, because there were so many Fnatic players involved, but these are arguably the 2 best teams in the history of EU. They got to the semifinals at Worlds, and in the finals, heading into Game 1, Fnatic was riding that 21-0 undefeated streak, 18-0 in the regular season, and 3-0 in their semifinals matchup. But Game 1 in this finals, everyone kind of thought Origen will be the team to beat them, and that's exactly what they did in Game 1. So as his Gangplank completely destroyed Huni's Lulu, and his split pushing was an absolute force to get Origen some advantages. He got both Nexus turrets. Nexus is exposed. Eventually Origen would go through to close that and end the 21-game win streak of Fnatic to go 1-0 up in the finals. And heading into Game 2, it was a pretty controlled game by the likes of Fnatic. They kind of just starved Origen out of the map and out of all the objectives before. Again, a kind of growing theme in all these playoff series is Tristana is a contested pick in 3-4 different eras. seasons of League of Legends, Tristana continues to be a coveted pick. Fnatic controls that game to tie things up at 1, and obviously heading into Game 3 is where you have the best play of the series. And keep in mind that this game was in Sweden and Reckless playing in his home country. He replaced Steelback in this split for Fnatic, and he definitely proved in Game 3 that he's a little bit better than Steelback.
Playful Tricksters forward, and a two-man taunt on the front line of Origen forces a defensive onslaught of Shadows. Soaz rides the Lantern out, and the passive from Azir will keep the tower alive. Rainover was in trouble. There goes Yellowstar, another taunt. Mooney's looking for Miffy. Wild Growth will slow them down. Glitzerlance connects as well. And Reckless plus that's a kill to Reckless rather. That's a double. He's looking for more. That's a triple. He's looking for 4. That's the quadra. He will get it. The reset forward. Looking for a pentakill. We're in Sweden. The Swedish gets a pentakill.
Reckless is on fire today. He's jumping forward. He gets the kills. He wins the fight for Fnatic.
That's how you do it in front of your hometown, Reckless, my boy. That would give Fnatic a 2-1 series lead. They'd close it out after that penta, and then we roll onwards into Game 4, where you'd think that's a pretty soul-crushing defeat for Origen to go down into that 4th game, but they actually do pretty darn well, because Fnatic puts together, not only do they close out Game 3 with a pentakill, but then they amass a 12,000 gold lead in Game 4, but Origen survives. They gave up a couple of Barons to Fnatic, but they just get to the late game, and this time it's Niels, or now Sven, who had the Tristana, and late game with the Lulu, it was just absolutely disgusting. It was the Ardent Sensor meta before Ardent Sensor was a thing, because that's just how strong Lulu was. But they get the Tristana. He pops off in the late game, and they tie this series up at 4. And we're needing a 5th game where this failed base race, I don't know if you can really call it that, both teams trying to trade objectives, but Origen ends up getting just an inhib turret. They don't even get the inhibitor, whereas Fnatic says just keep on pushing. We outnumber them. They're going to grab the turret, and they grab the inhib, as well as a couple of kills, because Fnatic is fed on the Corki. Doesn't matter that he doesn't have Tristana this game. Fnatic would be able to snowball off this crazy base race in the 5th game. But what a series between these two European squads. Clearly the top 2 dogs in EU throughout the entire regular season. Both the regular season matchups were what everyone was hoping for. This series, it had comebacks, it had pentakills, it had, well, mini base races, some Baron contests and Baron steals, and crazy fights around Baron, which is something you always want in these series. And that is definitely the best series in the history of the EU LCS, and we got it as the best series in the history of NA or EU, because these two teams were playing at such a high level, and that was only demonstrated when they advanced to Worlds, and they both made it to the semifinals. Origen, because they didn't play in spring, had to run through the gauntlet, even though they played such a hard-fought series against Fnatic, which nobody else in EU did at that time. They still ran it through the gauntlet, qualified as that 3rd seed at Worlds, had a group of death with LGD, KT, and TSM, managed to get out of that, and then advance all the way to the semifinals. So those are arguably, still to date, the 2 best teams in the history of the EU LCS. No offense to some fantastic G2 rosters, but Fnatic Origen comes in as number 1 on our playoff series list. That's all the time today for League Unlocked. My name's Eric. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next time.